Unfortunately, that's all the Chinese that I know. I want to thank this Summit Conference for inviting me. It's a great privilege to be here in Beijing and to have such a distinguished crowd and a particularly distinguished group of speakers to work with them. Today I want to emphasize a couple of themes that have already been brought up, but I'll be putting them in a different perspective. One is holistic education, which I firmly believe in, and I think it's extremely important. And the other is education as a way of forming citizens of the world and citizens of countries, in addition to serving as a way of preparing them for particular professions. So first thing I'd just like to give you is a little bit of information about me, some background, because it'll explain where I'm going. I was born to academics. My father was a plant geneticist at the University of California, a specialist in tomatoes, and especially wild tomatoes. He traveled extensively in South America collecting the wild species, and he took his family with him. So early in life, I learned the value of cross-cultural education. I learned the value of knowing other cultures and other languages. And even though I had some interest in these wild tomatoes, as you can see in the pictures above, he instructed me in such things as the Galapagos Islands, which you can see on the left-hand side. He's showing me the fine points of these islands, but in the middle, I'm already showing my main interest in life, and that is archaeology, study of the past. I'm exploring a site that has engraved stone figures in the middle, and that launched a 40-year career thus far in the archaeology of the Andes. And that's me on the right, still excavating in this area. So I have a tendency to think of the past as important, but I think it's more important than most of us realize. Humanistic education, I think, is necessary to produce the citizens of tomorrow. But secure identities don't come easy. They require a number of things, such as the study of the past, the patrimony of a people. The past informs the present, and the present always makes reference to the past. But also in the present, we always make reference to the other, as we say in anthropology. That other cultural entity, those other people, we define ourselves in relationship to other people in many cases. But when it comes to teaching identity, how would you do that? How can you teach someone else their identity? Well, you can't, and you shouldn't. But you can teach them how to go about doing that, how to know the past, how to know who they are in the present. And I think that's a very, very important part of humanistic education. Most people look at humanistic education in the context of the emphasis on STEM, science and technology, and say, well, humanistic education will make you a better rounded person. Well, certainly it does, but that's not what's so important. Without the humanistic side of education, you could produce incredibly competent technologists. But it doesn't mean they will be informed about who they are. And if they're insecure in who they are, if their ideas about who they are simplistic, they will probably fall back to such things as good and bad. I'm good, that's bad. It's not an identity. That's just an opposition. So I think it's very important that in humanistic education to go about teaching people how to understand the past and how that relates to who they are. Teach them about other cultures and how that relates to who they are. Now, one of the things I do want to argue is that human beings are best defined, in my opinion, not as tool makers, not as symboling animals, but as model builders. This is the thing we do really, really well. And we do it in technology and science, and we do it in humanities, and we do it with identity. Model building, simplifying reality. We're the only animal that cares that much about the details of reality, but we cannot comprehend and we cannot make functional a model. In fact, there is no model that includes all the complexity of any given situation. So we simplify. A good model is one where the simplification doesn't limit the worth of the model for a given purpose. A bad model is where the simplification has eliminated essential, important aspects of reality. So I think, in many ways, what we're doing in humanistic education, even though it sounds rather scientific, model building, you're teaching model building. That's a very essential part of it. Now, what I want to do is take you on two little adventures to places in the world where I've worked, where I've learned a lot about how archaeology can contribute to identity, but also the complexities of identity and the importance of the past to those identities. Well, the first one is Zuni Pueblo. This is a reservation of Native Americans in the American Southwest, in the state of New Mexico. The Zuni tribe is one of the most well-preserved tribes in the United States. They still have their religion, they still have much of their social organization, they're more intact, and they know more about themselves, and they're more self-confident than most of the Native Americans in the United States. But because they're isolated in a rural part of New Mexico, they don't have many economic possibilities. There's no employment except the tribal government. They are good farmers. They know how to farm, but that doesn't give them the money they need to get along in the real world. So the Zuni tribe, here you can see the location in the landscape, the basic map of the Southwest. You can see a historic in black and white. The photograph in the middle, a historic photograph of the Pueblo of Zuni, and then an air photograph on the right overlooking the modern town of Zuni. Not quite so much the apartment building style of the Pueblo Indians as it used to be. But the Zuni tribe came to Stanford University, where I'm obviously based, and they brought us a wish list. They said, here are a number of things we think that a big university can do for a tribe that has many problems. And the one that I saw as a member of a faculty seminar trying to make sense out of what we could do to help the tribe was that they complained that their high school students, that they run their own high school system, had trouble gaining admission to universities, and worse yet, they couldn't keep in the university systems. They found them to be strange. They were far away from the reservation and involved people they'd never met. And Zuni is very small scale. And so most of them would drop out. So the tribe said, can you do something about that? And we thought, well, maybe we could do something with the high schools. The left-hand photograph here, nearer me, is Zuni High School with the symbol of the thunderbird. That's one of the old cultural symbols of Zuni. And on the right hand, you can see the halls of Zuni High School with big murals painted on the walls. including Zuni icons that are related to their past. These are all painted by the students. So I thought, well, maybe we could go and try to do some teaching, some preparatory teaching for entering the universities. And it ended up being a model of something like this one we see here, in which if we could teach in the Zuni high schools with what I was to name the Stanford Zuni Archaeological Education Project, we could help get students off to the yellow rectangle, higher education. If they're successful, and if they follow the teaching that I had started working in archaeology, they could come back and work in the Zuni Archaeology program, which is a tribal enterprise that could not at that time hire Zuni students or Zuni adults because they did not have higher degrees. So here was a way, admittedly not a total solution, but a partial solution to some of the economic problems, in which a culturally meaningful employment could be found by following archaeology as a career. On the right hand, you can see our first attempt at doing this. In the middle are two Stanford students, and the two students flanking on either side are Zuni high school students. They voluntarily joined this class. It was just called World History, but it wasn't at all. It was in fact Zuni Archaeology. But I passed out a questionnaire the first day of class. I had a number of questions, but the important one was, why do you want to take this class? And I thought they would say something about college education or something like that. But no, they came back and the great majority said, we want to learn what it is to be Zuni. I said, I'm not Zuni. How can I teach you how to be you? But then I realized there are ways. There are many ways to do that. I started connecting them up to their grandparents. A connection that had been lost because largely of TV and video games. No one took the time to talk to their grandchildren, nor did the grandchildren try. But there was interest to do so, and very soon they were gaining all sorts of information from their grandparents. We also took them on field trips. And here you can see us visiting an ancient site in the Southwest, one that may be ancestral to the Zuni students. And there's the school bus on the right. As soon as we get near the overlook, where we can see that site, the students jump out of their seat, go to the window, and they're fascinated. They're very, very interested in this. So we were in the end rather successful in interesting the students in getting them involved in their past, finding out more about their own history. Eventually we excavated with them and had a great time actually looking into the more remote past with them. In sum, where we got to with them was to reconnect them with their past, which helped produce an informed identity, which made them much more self-confident when they went out to the universities. And they were capable of lasting in these very foreign settings for them. The contact with the Stanford undergraduates who I took on these teaching expeditions to work in small groups in classes was a beautiful example of multicultural education, because the learning was two-way, and even though all these students were citizens of the United States, they had very, very different backgrounds. And I think that type of cross-cultural work is very important. So, in the end, many of them did obtain college degrees. Quite a number are employed in archaeology today. Small scale, but I think an interesting thing. Second major example, very different. Here we have to go to Peru, to Chavín de Huántar. This is a prehistoric site that dates back about 3,000 years. And it's one that for me is most interesting. My career is driven there. I've been there 25 years now working. Because it appears that this is the time period in which authority originates in the Andes of Peru. Now, this may be confusing to you because many people think that humanity has been authority-driven as long as it has existed. That's false, completely false. That's an example of the past not being well understood. If you go back more than 5,000 or 7,000 years, even here in China, you will not be in authority-driven systems. That's rare. So where did authority come from? We all live in authority-driven systems. Almost everybody in the world does. And we don't know where they came from? We've got a problem. Imagine in any other aspect of our life not knowing where the most important aspect of it came from. So that gives me lots of good reason to be interested in the site of Chavín. That's in the middle here, a reconstructed model of the temple system. And on the far right, you can see where it lies, in a deep valley between the major mountain ranges of the Andes. Now, I could talk a long time on authority, but there isn't the time. The concept is important. Authority. It's power, but it's accepted power. It's power which people believe in. It's power which people come to expect will be used. A president is an authority. Why? Because the person is the president, not necessarily because they've done any particular thing. So, authority is an established power. We don't need to worry about the image on the right so much. But in the case of Chavín, authority was built prehistorically by religious means with a wide combination of activities, including the worship of major sculptured idols like you see on the left, complex rituals, many times involving water ritualism, much of it occurring underground in constructed galleries, very mysterious spaces. But within all of these situations, there was manipulation of sound and water, and there was the use of psychoactive substances, all within this architecture, which created a different world, a world in which the credibility that priests actually were capable of communicating with gods. And therefore they were a world apart, but they could also integrate new people into the cult. And so many people came from far away to join that cult. Well, back to the issue of education. I take up to 70 people to Chavín. These include students from high school up to graduate students. And that includes a lot of Peruvian students, quite a number from the United States, Stanford, my own university, and also many other places in the world. So we create a cross-cultural context by studying in this way. And I think that's very important. It's part of education that many of you probably know. Part of education is what you teach. Another part of education is the formation in which you teach it. In this case, I think that's tremendously important. We've also combined engineering with humanistic students, and that's proved to be very, very worthwhile, both, again, for intercommunication between them, but also to communicate and teach within local communities. Here you can see in the images us teaching in classrooms of local high schools, and then here you get our engineers, in one particular case, demonstrating robots, which we use for going deep into the structures. So, under these circumstances, we can interest students across a wide range of subject matters and ages in a culture that is really quite different. That's, I think, the type of cross-cultural education we need to do. Now, then finally, it's my last major issue. What does the past mean to different stakeholders, different interested parties in Peru? Here are a representation of 5 different groups. On the left, a group of traditional village leaders. They're going around the town, and they've got a strambas trumpet, That's a shell trumpet in the hands of the left-hand person. That's an ancient instrument. They were using them 3,000 years ago. And it's announcing the village authorities. Those authorities are gaining their authority because they're using the past. They're doing something that's within the tradition. Then, in the middle, upper panel, we have artisans from Chavín, and they're displaying their handicrafts, carved stones, taking designs from the site of Chavín and selling them to the public. They're using the past in a more economic way, but it's fundamental to their existence. Below that, you have a series of workers in our excavations who are fascinated by an object that has just been found. Those people are finding their identity. They're coming to an understanding of what their ancestors were doing in the site. Upper right, it's a strange poster with obviously very military people who are actually representing those who liberated the Japanese ambassador's residence, which was taken over by terrorist groups back in the 1990s. That group of dangerously armed men who liberated the hostages called their operation Chavín de Huántar. Why? Because they tunneled underneath the structure. But the terrorists who they ended up removing, eliminating actually, had a different interpretation of the past because they believed that the Inca, the very late prehistoric culture of the Andes, was an ideal socialist society. It was not. I can tell you as an archaeologist, I know this. They built the past on false data, really false data. But it allowed them to do things like kill a lot of people that a simplistic or badly informed model of the past can do. I ran into these people and had long discussions with them at gunpoint. Luckily, I'm here to tell the tale. And finally, last image is former president of Peru being inaugurated as president of the country with someone playing a strongest trumpet. So, get the idea. We're back to the idea of authority being transferred and reinforced by the past. It's precisely those sorts of things that students must be educated about if they're to understand the symbols in their own societies. So finally, I really do think that humanistic education is a powerful tool that we should be using. To the degree we don't use it, it will be misused. To the degree that people don't understand their past, they will either be trapped by others who have bad intentions about the past, or they'll just be underinformed, insecure, and incapable of operating as full members of their own culture. Thank you very much. I appreciate your attention.
感谢 John Rick 先生的精彩演讲。Thank you very much to Professor John Rick for his wonderful speech.